Good evening. At 6:30, I'd like to call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for May the 9th to order. Can I have the roll, please?
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
John Spring.
Here.
Brandon Walker is excused. Brandon Sporhays.
Here.
Anthony Cage.
Present.
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Danielle Bailey. Here. Mitzi Barker. Here. And Greg Strike.
Here. Thank you. You have the minutes from Monday, April 11th. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Seconded. Seconded by Mr. Strike. Any discussion on these minutes? Danielle.
Just that I won't be voting, but this will end up being for disclosures, but I was not here on the 11th.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none. Any opposition? None. Hearing none, the minutes are adopted. Disclosures. Mr. Spring.
I have none.
Danielle?
Again, just that I was not present at the meeting on the 11th, so I will not be able to voice towards the consent items 1A, B, or C.
Okay. Mr. Strike?
Yes, along the same line in regards to Resolution 2016-021, which corresponds to D1D. I was not present at that May 2nd meeting, so will not be voting.
Thank you. Tony?
No disclosures.
Mr. Spinell?
None.
Mitzi?
Nothing.
Brandon?
No disclosures.
And I have none. Next up is an information item regarding AO 2016-054. Is there a staff wishing to speak to this ordinance?
Mr. Chair, no, there's no staff to speak to that ordinance.
Someone want to give me at least a heads up of what we have in front of us?
Mr. Chair, Terry may know more about it than I do, but it's just an information item. Apparently, this ordinance rewrite went directly to the Assembly. I was just reading over it while I was sitting here, and it seems to be that's the case. So I think they're giving it to the commissioners just to have a look-see.
Okay,
Through the chair, if you want some explanation, I can provide a little.
I was just looking for something brief. I mean, and in particular, you know, we had discussed previously situations when items would go directly to the Assembly, and you know, we actually had a resolution to the effect asking for information items to come to us. And so I just, if you could just speak to that and maybe speak to this specifically, but you know, whether this is, we're going to see these regularly, and kind of what level of items go directly to the Assembly.
This one will be going for introduction, I believe, tomorrow night to the Assembly. It falls into what we've come to refer to as the OOPS category, and it was that the items that you see in here were incorporated into Title 21. They were intended to be incorporated into the Eagle River chapter of the same portion for uses, and they had not been. And as a result, what this does is it corrects the Eagle River chapter to incorporate those, Chapter 10.
Okay, thank you. And other types of items then will be brought to us when they're decided that they're, and this seems pretty minor to me, but I imagine some might feel a little more substantive.
There are a number of them that are coming your way that are more substantive and will fall on your desk first to take a look at it before they go to the Assembly.
Great, thanks. I can't see anybody in the queue. We're not acting on this, but if you go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
This says voting in progress, so I can't get in the queue.
Go ahead, though.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that it was sent to us, and I think what we were trying to get from the Assembly was to at least distribute it to us so that we could look at it and say, basically, this is minor and we don't have any problem with it. Go ahead and bypass us this time. We're okay with it. I don't think we intended to make it a motion, a form of a motion, but I think it wouldn't hurt to have a motion to say the Planning and Zoning Commission recognizes that this is a minor amendment and falls under the category of expedited process.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're not being asked for formal adoption, but if you want to make a motion to make a recommendation to the Assembly that they adopt this, you're more than welcome.
I think that was the intent in my resolution that I helped write and we voted on, to tell them, to at least review it and make a formal statement that, yes, we're cool with it. And go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's my motion.
So let me hear you restate the motion.
The mo-
That we're cool with it?
I won't use those terms. I move that we recommend forwarding this minor Title 21 amendment to the Assembly with the acknowledgement that it is an instance where it's necessary to make a minor correction to expedite the process. That's terrible. Let me try again.
Sounded good. I was going to second that.
Were you going to second that?
Yeah.
Was that okay?
I think we got it.
Okay. Thank you.
You know, I'm sure you can make it
appreciate it.
prettier, but it works.
I'm not known for
So,
my spontaneous motion.
was that a second from Tony?
I think we've got something with the machines where we're still on the approval of the minutes, maybe. Or at least yeah. You asked for unanimous consent, and we didn't have a vote on, so if we could. So if I withdraw mine and John moves.
I didn't make any motion.
Hold on a sec. How would you like us to proceed? You want to try to clear the system? You want us to just do it verbally?
I think we're probably going to end up having to do it verbally.
Andre's now voting no to something. I'm not sure what. So if,
I'll speak.
yeah, are you ready? We're just going to do it verbally. So I have a motion from Mr. Spring, second by Mr. Kange. Is that right? And I won't get it as right, but the idea is to recommend adoption of this ordinance and acknowledge that it does seem to be one of those things that streamlining makes sense. But
Can
go.
I speak to the actual ordinance briefly?
Yes,
It looks
please.
like.
Please do.
I think next time it would be good to make, as just part of the process, to have staff kind of brief us about the ordinance a little bit, be prepared to brief us on the ordinance. In this case, it appears to me that it's just a correction of some minor uses in industrial category that weren't included in Chugach-Eagle River portion of the zone. So this is just kind of making it more consistent with the Anchorage Bowl portion of the Title 21. So very minor.
But I would take your comments there as findings, and I do think it's important that we weigh in on whether these things are worthy of being streamlined. I know there's many in the community that are somewhat leery when these things are considered fast track. So I think it's helpful that people here weigh in on whether you agree that it's a big deal or not. So thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak? Did you say you wanted to talk to?
I think this is going to a much deeper issue in that, even in the main paragraph here, and it says, and waiving review by the Planning and Zoning Commission in accordance with AMC. This document is purely informational only to us. And in sitting in a past meeting with the Assembly, and some of you were there, and I'm going to be a little crass here, they don't care, basically verbatim, they don't care what we think on this matter.
We work for them, according to them.
Yeah.
This was the same meeting I was at. So I don't think there's anything personally right now on this ordinance. This is not an ordinance. This is not something that's come before us to consider. This is not something that has come to us to weigh in on. We have not been asked to give our opinion on. This is purely informational only. And for us to take any action other than to read it and absorb it is going well beyond the stated intent here.
Well, I guess I would just say you're right. It was presented to us as an information item. It's within the purview of this body to make a recommendation. And I think the statement here that Mr. Spring, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the reason why I would support the recommendation is I think there will become a time when you see oops issues that are more significant, and for us to state for it whether or not someone's listening, because in fact the community may listen, and I represent the municipality of Anchorage, right, as does the Assembly, and we represent an open and transparent planning process. And I think our action here tonight is simply saying, this is fine, this agrees that it's minor, we think you should adopt it, but if the opinion is different, whether or not someone listens to it, we have the opportunity to say what we think about it.
And one of my concerns is that we keep the backdoor communications open and keep these documents still flowing to us for that, not consideration, but for that review. Because right now, there is no obligation to even forward this document to us for that review.
No, there actually is.
No, actually, I don't believe there is.
Terry, I think the way that it's written is it's still to be presented as an information item. Is that not true, the way that the code is written?
Through the chair to Commissioner Strike, I believe we are obligated to provide information to the Planning and Zoning Commission in a case where, in fact, I think in one of the clauses that's identified there, it actually makes reference to that. But there is an obligation to present this to the Planning and Zoning Commission for informational purposes. So that's the objective tonight. That's why it's on the agenda.
I'm saying
I want to keep that coming. I want that.
And that was, no, and I agree, and that was part of our resolution that we passed last month, which asked for that. And I think what I heard Terry indicate is that in times where they would be sort of on the fence as to whether it ought to be just an information item or a full-blown deal, he may choose to pick up the phone and call at least me or somebody to just run it by us. But my point is I think there's going to be times where it doesn't seem like a real small issue, and we're allowed to comment on it. I would frankly look at it as my responsibility to comment on it. But point well taken. Anybody else wishing to comment? Okay, there's a motion on the table. It's been seconded. Please vote. All right, we're not able to. Is there any objection to this particular recommendation? No. Hearing none, that motion to make that recommendation is approved unanimously. Okay, next up is the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Wow, okay. Mr. Sporhays moved, Ms. Barker seconded. Any items other than the disclosures of who were not in attendance? Anyone wishing to pull any items on the consent agenda? Seeing none, please vote on the consent agenda. Any objection to adopting the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted unanimously. Sorry, with the, there we go. Okay, next up, the one item on our regular agenda, which is not a public hearing item, case number 2016-42, Context-Sensitive Solutions Transportation Project Overview, a design study report for Turnagain Street and Turnagain Boulevard upgrade. Is there a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The project will upgrade Turnagain Boulevard to current MOA collector standards, including new roadway surface, pedestrian facilities, street lighting, and improved drainage. Only approval of Turnagain Boulevard is sought at this time. Proposed improvements to Turnagain Boulevard include new road foundation, piped drainage system, pedestrian bicycle facilities, and street lighting. The project improvements will be phased because the municipality cannot assemble sufficient funding to do the entire project. 6 alternatives were considered for the entire length of the project. Alternative 6 is the preferred alternative for Turnagain Boulevard. Only one alternative was considered as sufficient right-of-way, allowed construction of the desired improvements to meet collector road standards. In terms of lighting, a continuous roadway LED system is proposed. In terms of landscape design, the overall goal of the landscape design is to limit impacts to existing vegetation where feasible and provide new landscaping where space allows. They are also considering adding pattern concrete bands to better delineate pedestrian facilities from parking areas and driveways. And also there's a potential to add a wayfinding column at Turnagain Boulevard, at the intersection there. On-street parking. On-street parking space is provided adjacent to the park for approximately 17 cars. That may change a bit depending on how the configuration of how they're going to park the cars decide to. The department recommends approval of the draft DSR for Turnagain Boulevard upgrade, subject to 4 conditions that are on page 5 of the packet.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Before I go to Mr. Spring, just to be clear, you've indicated that the work is occurring on Turnagain Boulevard. Are we approving a design study report for Turnagain Street as well here this evening?
No, no, you aren't. They intend to come back later with a DSR for just that road. Tonight, it will just be Turnagain Boulevard.
Okay. Mr. Spring?
Yes, to the chair, staff. The condition number 2 on the page 5 states, remove the east side 3.5-foot shoulder for the Gilliam Circle to South Bennett Avenue portion of the roadway per comments from the non-motorized coordinator. I'm a little confused about that one. The coordinator was concerned, it seemed, that with the size of the parking lane. I think the design shows a parking lane of 10 foot and a shoulder on the, I guess it'd be the inside of that parking lane, 3.5 feet between the parking lane and the roadway lane. And to tell you the truth, that makes sense to me. I'm going to probably follow up with a question to the designers, but your statement says eliminate the 3.5-foot shoulder. So I think maybe there's a disconnect between this condition and what the non-motorized coordinator was trying to say. I don't think she was saying remove the 3.5-foot shoulder.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I think what she meant, it's on page 83 of the packet that shows the alternative, and they have a, right next to the drive lane, they have a 3.5-foot space there. And I did speak with the design engineer for the project, and he agrees that they will remove that.
But was that what the
Yeah.
motorized coordinator was saying?
Yeah, if you look at it, it's pretty odd.
Well, I'll talk to the designers a little bit about that, but I don't find it odd because there's a 3.5-foot shoulder along the entire length of the street. And this just continues the 3.5-foot space, which in my opinion can be used for bicyclists. And a lot of times bicyclists that are real good bicyclists don't like to use multi-use pathways. And I'm not even sure they're going to have a continuous multi-use pathway because the report said where feasible. Well, maybe it won't be feasible to have a continuous multi-use pathway. In that case, it'd be nice to have a continuous 3.5-foot shoulder. Well, in this case, the only way to have the continuous 3.5-foot shoulder would be to have it on the outside of the parking lane. And to me, that makes sense. And 10-foot parking lane makes sense when you have a bike lane or a bike shoulder adjacent to it because you got 48-inch doors opening up. And the report I read this afternoon, I researched, said that you actually need that 11 feet to have enough space for a bicyclist to ride adjacent to a parking lane. So
Okay.
I don't find it. Anyway.
Good comment. Any other comments?
No, but I'll follow up.
Yeah, please do. Danielle, you're in the queue.
I was actually going to speak to the same thing, that it seemed very odd that it would remove bike lane and then there just wouldn't be one, especially considering the fact that on a section of this trail there's not even a sidewalk. So if you're looking for bike commuters, they would have to, they're starting from the bottom, they would be in the 3.5-foot bike lane and then have to go to the multi-use pathway and then go back to the 3.5 bike lane or go across the street with the traffic, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. And also just as a kind of a procedural issue, it seems kind of weird to approve this when there are certain things like traffic calming that weren't put into the design, and this will perhaps be a question that I ask them when they present, but it seems odd that so much of this, of how the street is oriented, will depend on how they choose to do the traffic calming, and so it leaves a lot up for grab unless they're going to go back and redo construction, which seems like it'd be a waste of money. But again, I didn't understand why the removal of a 3.5-foot bike lane would make sense.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. John, are you back in, or you just, you might see if you can remove yourselves, because I can't take you out. Okay, good. Anybody else comments for staff? Okay, I'd like to ask the petitioners to come forward. It's not a public hearing item, so we sort of will time you at 10 minutes. I'm sure there'll be questions beyond that. And just one thing that I would ask, one of the things, it sounded like Ms. Bailey was able to sort of grasp the transitions. I'm having trouble grasping the transitions as they change. What happens to that trail? Where do you go? Does it just end mid-block? Does it put you into a sidewalk? I can't tell. Is there as you give the presentation, I'd really like the picture that shows how one of these segments attaches to the next segment, to the next segment. That'd be real helpful. Thanks. See, there's no public hearing tonight. Will do.
So, good evening. My name is Justin Keene. I work for CRW Engineering
Could
Group.
you please spell your name?
Last name,
First and last.
Justin, Justin. Last name is Keene, Keene. And I'd just like to first start off just giving a little bit more background on the project and how we came about sort of splitting the two segments of roadway. So the project always included both Turnagain Street, and that's the north one, north of 35th and McRae, and also included Turnagain Boulevard, which is the south portion of the project, which is from 35th and McRae to Spenard Road. And Turnagain Boulevard has 60 feet of available right-of-way, where Turnagain Street only has 40 feet of available right-of-way. So to be able to fit a collector roadway in a section of right-of-way, you really need about 60 feet to be able to put 2 pedestrian facilities. And for Turnagain Street, obviously that means if we try to put a collector roadway in, there's really big significant impacts to the existing properties. It would require several full property acquisitions, which significantly increases the portion of that project's cost. So because we have the right-of-way for Turnagain Boulevard, the south portion, and because there's some immediate need of drainage improvements for that section, Turnagain Boulevard is the first phase that we're moving forward with and trying to get approval for the design study report. We have some alternatives that you probably saw in the draft design study report for Turnagain Street, but we're not providing a preferred alternative at this time because we need additional feedback from the community as well as additional feedback from MOA stakeholders at a later date to determine what the preferred alternative is going to be for Turnagain Street. So luckily, Turnagain Boulevard, the one we're moving forward with, the preferred alternative for that portion of the project will allow for any of those future Turnagain Street North alternatives to be constructed in the future. So we're not putting ourselves in a corner with what we move forward with. To summarize a little bit about the existing conditions of Turnagain Boulevard, this is again the south portion that we're moving forward with. It's an existing strip paved roadway with no continuous pedestrian facility between Spenard and 35th. There's a discontinuous paved trail along the east side of Turnagain Boulevard from Spenard up to Fish Creek Park. And then the other big problem associated with Turnagain Boulevard is there's significant drainage issues due to failing culverts and lack of appropriate drainage ditches. Currently, whenever there's a large storm event out there, the intersection of Borland Drive and Turnagain Boulevard ends up flooding, and they actually have to close down the road, and MOA Street Maintenance has to go out there with a pumper truck and pumps the drainage out to Fish Creek. So this project, along with upgrading the roadway to collector standards, is going to be a huge improvement to the existing drainage. We'll be putting in a new pipe storm drain system and new oil grit separators to clean the water before it discharges into Fish Creek. There's also an existing failing storm drain system along Bennett Avenue that the project's going to replace as well. As Sharon mentioned, we're also going to have a new roadway foundation, new pedestrian facilities, on-street parking near Fish Creek Park, and continuous roadway lights, LED roadway lights. So our project is also coordinating with MOA Parks and Rec Department for their playground improvement upgrade project this summer at the Fish Creek Park. And our project is also coordinating with the Fish Creek Trail Rehabilitation Project, which is an AMATS project. And that Fish Creek Trail starts from Fish Creek Park and goes north. So we'll be coordinating between projects to make sure we start and stop at the appropriate location. We've had 3 open houses during the draft DSR development, various presentations to the Turnagain Community Council meetings, and actually presented just last week at the TCC, and they are in support of how we're moving forward with Turnagain Boulevard and the basic overall design. They have some recommendations that we'll be looking at trying to implement as we move into the 65% design. But it's going to be a great improvement project for the residents in the community, much needed. So to specifically talk to, I think, your question about the where the different cross sections start and stop. So these are the basic 3 cross sections for the roadway for Turnagain Boulevard. And the first one on top there, that's the one that goes from 35th down to just north of Wiley Post. And the reason why we can't put a pathway on the east side of the road is because Fish Creek actually parallels Turnagain Boulevard and ends up entering into the right-of-way, and we lose our available space in the right-of-way to be able to put that pathway. During the more detailed design, we're going to look at possibly shifting the roadway and or possibly attaining more right-of-way or installing retaining walls to get that pathway in. So from north of Wiley Post to so from Wiley Post to Gillum Circle, we've got the full roadway cross-section, which is a sidewalk on one side of the road and a pathway on the other side. We then transition into the parking lane, which that's where you guys had the questions about the 3.5-foot shoulder and the 10-foot parking. And then eventually we transition back out of that parking lane and then go back to this cross-section where we've got the sidewalk on one side, the pathway on the other. So basically we're able to put in 2 pedestrian facilities for the entire stretch, except for the far north portion where we just don't have the space available with the existing Fish Creek.
So, thank you. So, help me understand I get the issue on the north section, and what I think I hear you saying is you're not fully satisfied with the alternative that you have here, that you are going to try to accommodate pedestrian on the east side of the road in some way, but it requires further study. Is that what I heard you say?
For Turnagain Boulevard?
For Turnagain Boulevard from McCrae from North Wiley Post to McCrae, moving north.
Yeah. Everybody, including the public and the design team, want to try to get that pathway in. We just, at this point, we didn't find a solution that would allow us to put that pathway in to connect all the way to 35th. So our thought right now is that we're going to need a design criteria waiver if that can't be accomplished, kind of going in with the worst case scenario.
I get that. What I am most fearful of is pathways and sidewalks that just disappear, that we build them and they don't go anywhere, right? And so, but you're basically telling someone you're in a safe space until you're not. And so understanding what's going to happen there kind of dictates what you do when you do have the room. I got a couple of people in the queue, but I wonder, still help me understand, the pathway then picks up at Gillum, the multi-use pathway. It sort of just starts somewhere. I mean, where does it just begin? Does it begin next to the sidewalk and it peels out of it? Where does this magically appear?
So on the west side, the sidewalk's continuous all the way from 35th all the way down to Spenard.
Yep.
But yes, on the east side, there's an existing, actually there might be a better, I'm not sure if that would show it any better. Basically, the pathway would just stop where we run out of right-of-way, which is on the east side, just north of Wiley Post Avenue.
Stop where? Like in a road, or just stop?
No, it would stop adjacent to the roadway.
Would it connect? Okay, so both the sidewalk and the pathway just kind of get there and they just stop.
No, the sidewalk would extend all the way up to West 35th Avenue.
We're back on the east side of the street here.
Okay.
I'm concerned about the east side of the street.
Okay, the east side of the street, the pathway would have to stop north of Wiley Post, I think is what we have shown right now.
Okay. Well, I don't know that we're going to flesh out the details, but you see where my concern is. I can't appreciate or understand where it stops. Like, it's just what happened.
Do you have the plan and profile sheet? I could show you.
We got a let's see, R1, R2, R3 of 7. So we're looking at R3.
So there's a tennis court here, and the pathway just stops right there, right now.
Across from Wiley Post.
Right.
And what is this ownership right here? What is it, just sort of stopping in front of a house or in front of a?
This is all owned by Parks and Rec.
Okay.
And so what you can't really see here is Fish Creek actually gets closer and closer to the roadway as you move north. So we're pinching the roadway and creek are pretty much trying to be in the same space.
Okay, so I mean, that would be where I would say, if it can't continue, then you need to have a crossing or something to get to the other side, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and that was one of the recommendations by Lori Skanke, was to put in a crosswalk at Wiley Post.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. If you want to go back to the podium, I have a couple people that have some questions for you. So first off, Danielle, go ahead.
At this point, what has been considered as far as traffic calming? There's some stuff in here, and pretty much the only thing I can actually see that you are implementing is going to be marking the road, drawing lines on it, painting where the bike lanes is. That accurate?
So we definitely plan on putting in traffic calming, probably a combination of vertical and horizontal measures. What we haven't worked out with the traffic department is what specific traffic calming elements we'll be providing. Right now there's 3 speed humps that are out there, and it's been sort of a moving target with speed humps, whether or not those can be allowed to be reinstalled. So for the 35th and McRae project, the one that was just constructed within the last couple years, we did the raised intersections, where you actually raise up the entire intersection, and it basically acts as a big speed hump. It also gives the pedestrians a nice way to cross the intersection because you're at grade with the roadway at that point. So we're not forgetting about traffic calming. We've totally understand that the residents have a big desire to make sure that the new roadway doesn't, open the gate for more speeding that, is occurring already just with the current configuration.
I think where I'm having a problem is it seems like you guys really missed an opportunity to incorporate all the types of traffic calming measures that you wanted into getting a good design. For instance, when you're talking about that top section from McRae to North Wiley Post, a great traffic calming measure would be to change the alignment of the road, and then you could have a continuous pathway along the east side of the road, which is more beneficial because that's the side that the park is on. So you'd, one, have a contoured road that automatically slows down because it's not just a straight line. Another thing that could have happened was just to bump out corners where you have those 10-foot parking areas between Gilliam Circle to South Bennett. Then you wouldn't have the problem with it seeming like an extra lane of traffic, and you wouldn't have the planning staff hoping to shut down an entire bike lane. And so based on the recommendations that are through today, is a path on the east that, one, doesn't even have any pedestrian access all the way through, and now it has a suggestion that even the bike shoulder of that is removed on a portion. So you're having something on the side where there's a park where a lot of people access that park, that the pedestrian access is being shut off in 2 ways, one by bikes and one by foot traffic. And if the traffic calming had been brought in that original spot, I feel like a more creative solution could happen, whereas now the way it's essentially laid out is this is the design of the road, and after the fact we can do things like add a raised intersection, which is marginally better than a speed bump, but still most people hate them. And so I'm just slightly frustrated that I feel like a lot of things could have been handled differently, especially since with the Turnagain Community Council, this has been their top priority list, like 1 and 2 for the past, I could be getting it wrong, but at least 3 years. And that really the only things they wanted to have fixed was, first, the plumbing and draining issues, which I think you guys, it sounds like you've done a great job fixing. But the second was to provide pedestrian access, and the third was parking, and it kind of feels like you forgot one of those.
I think we still have the opportunity to make some of those elements as we move forward into the 65% design. We're by no means to the finish line on this project. I think you provided some great feedback, but we're not locked into the design as shown, and we're happy to make adjustments to facilitate the Turning Community Council's desires, as well as the MOA stakeholders and the Planning and Zoning Commission as well.
And then just one more question. You mentioned that you went to the Turning Community Council just recently, and you said that there was recommendations from them. I was wondering what those recommendations were regards to.
The recommendations, I think, were included in the big packet that was provided.
There was some that was from December of 2015, but I didn't see any from your most recent one, unless I'm missing something.
There might have been, do you have the whole packet?
I think so. Do you know
I
what?
could maybe come over and show you if,
I'm showing page 8 and 9 have recommendations from February 4th.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I saw those. Thank you.
Is that the most recent meeting?
yeah, yep. Yeah, and we went through those I went through those recommendations with the TCC last week, and most of those we are needing to move forward to be able to say we've actually done them, but we're happy to accommodate all those.
Right.
And yeah.
Good. And I just remind everybody that this is part of the process, and so by no means does the commission just say yay or nay. I mean, I think they're looking for feedback. So if there's specific or just general issues that you feel like this road doesn't quite get to, that's why they're here before they take the plans to 65%. Mr. Spinelli.
Yeah. On the new McCrae, is there a pathway for, if say this pathway on the east side of Turnagain Boulevard that we've been talking about, if it was to keep going, I don't remember there being something for it to connect to on McCrae.
That's correct. There's only a pedestrian facility on the north side of McCrae.
Yeah.
So you bring up a great point. The pedestrian would have to cross Turnagain Boulevard at McCrae to get to the public facility on the north side.
Benefit of the commissioners, that area is at the bottom of two hills on a corner, which probably isn't like the safest place to cross the street. So I was just, I mean, I grew up in this area, so I couldn't really see. Nobody travels on that side of the road.
On that south side of McCrae, yeah.
Anyway, that's all I have.
Thanks. Mr. Spring.
My turn.
Yeah.
Can you discuss a little bit about the feasibility of the multi-use pathway from on the east side from Spenard to the Fish Creek Park? Is it possible to have a continuous multi-use trail? You kind of hinted at in the report that where feasible, and I kind of raised the flag, wondering what is the problem? Is it some constraints there that you might not be able to do a continuous path?
No. On the east side, we will have the continuous path from Spenard all the way to Wiley Post.
Okay.
But maybe it's in regards to providing a buffer off the back of the sidewalk or back of the curb. There's areas where we may be able to actually provide an additional buffer between the back of the curb and the pathway.
Okay. That clarifies it. First of all, I think you did a good job on the design and took a lot of things into account that I think the Community Council was talking about. The parking, parallel parking is a nice idea there along the park. My only concern is I think this is going to be a pretty major bike route. I don't know if we anticipated this when we did the original bike plan, but the other facility paralleling this is Wisconsin, and Wisconsin's not a great bike path. It's really narrow shoulder type of bike path, and when you get to intersections, you got to go bump out into the lane to get up the street. And I think once Fish Creek Trail is improved, because it's not very good shape right now. I mean, it's real bumpy and got a lot of roots and whatever. Once that's done, I think this is going to be a major route between Spenard and the west side into downtown, because it connects over Northern Lights Bridge. From there, you get to the Coastal Trail. I know people that use this route to get to downtown or whatever. So I think it's going to be a pretty important route. And my concern is I like the shoulder, the 3.5-foot shoulder, and I agree if you have the 1.5-foot gutter pan. For a facility like as slow as this, as few traffic as this, I think that's going to be a sufficient on-street bike route. I would recommend possibly putting share road signs on there to make people understand that there's people are going to be using the road. And what I see happening is people using, good bicyclists, using the road until you get to the point where you hit the Fish Creek Trail, and then peeling off the Fish Creek Trail and going down that way. So that's why I'm thinking that 3.5-foot shoulder adjacent to the parking lane is going to be used by bicyclists. If you take that out, then they're kind of floating around there on the street without any real place to be. And the 10-foot, I think that was the comment of the coordinator, was the 10-foot parking lane be reduced to 7 feet, if I read it right, because that's kind of the standard minimum parking lane. But I think adjacent to a shoulder like this, which will go all the way up to 35th, and you could possibly use it to go that way if you want, up to 35th. It needs to have 10-foot parking lane, and with the 3.5-foot, because people don't always park right next to the curb. And the study I looked at did a like 95 percentile parking space separation from the curb, and they found that they don't do that, and that you've got to allow some room for parking lanes and door openings if you want to have a bike lane or a bike facility adjacent to that parking lane. And 11 foot was what they said was probably needed. I think 10-foot parking lane is fine. I would leave that in there and keep the 3.5-foot shoulder, like just exactly the way you have it designed now. Okay. And possibly think a little bit about how to make that connection from Turnagain, if you're riding on the street, to the pathway that takes you through the Greenbelt. Because there's got to be a way to get into that pathway, probably a curb cut or something would be there that you can just take the curb cut and connect with that path from the street and not necessarily have to start at Spenard and take the multi-use path and up there. And you combination.
Yeah, there's a parking lot just south of Fish Creek Park, so there'll be a curb cut there or a curb return radius there. So the person who is biking in the street could easily make that maneuver and transition into the trail and then into Fish Creek Trail and continue north. But yeah, good point about Wisconsin Street. I think that is the bicycle lane, the north-south connector, and they don't have Turnagain Boulevard or Turnagain Street as one of those, official bike routes in the bike plan.
Yeah, and sometimes if you got to deviate from the bike plan a bit.
Yeah.
I would, in this case, I would recommend it, I think. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we can coordinate with Lori Skanke, the non-motorized coordinator, as to what she prefers in regards to striping the bike lane, if that's going to be something.
Yeah, or a sign, share road.
Right.
I think would be okay. But Lori, she's the coordinator, so.
Yeah.
I've heard some specific, suggestions or things to think about from both you and Danielle, so just be thinking when there's a motion on the table. Mr. Sporhays.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin, thank you for the presentation. On page 49 of your draft study report, it looks like there's an aerial, and I'm on the south end of the project, basically where the Turnagain Arts building is. And I was hoping for some clarity. It looks like there's going to be a bicycle path on the east side of Turnagain Boulevard and it runs by the Turning Arts building. I've seen kind of what is happening there, but what's happening next door at the commercial kind of construction company site? You know, they've got, you know, heavy equipment coming in and out of there. It looks like the bicycle lane kind of kicks towards the east. Is that all in the right of way? Is it part of their parking? Maybe a little
Yeah, it'll be all in the right of way, and I think right now some of those existing commercial properties are spilling into the right of way.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, we're gonna probably have to do some coordination prior to construction. But the idea is that pathway continues on the east side. Whether it gets pushed as far as we have shown, we may not need to push it that far east, but we're going to try to utilize the right of way the best we can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just kind of concerned because I've, you know, kind of like Andre, I'm from the area, and I've seen a lot of, you know, heavy equipment come in and out of there at you know, great rates of speed, and I just don't want to see somebody wheeling down on a bicycle and, you know, and shortening the distance between where they come out of their yard and where the bicycle path is.
Right,
versus,
right.
Versus right now, people kind of ride on the road, if you will.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of a safety concern. And then also, I didn't see it in here, but I find it helpful to maybe have an aerial kind of satellite imagery that has the right-of-way and things like that on there for the entire project. It kind of helps me gather my thoughts a little bit more instead of, and maybe it's in there and I didn't see it, but
Yeah, there's...
And I've seen a couple that have kind of where the project area is, if you will, but not where specific lines are and how they intersect, say, property lines.
Okay, yeah, we'll look to add one of those figures for a future.
Because I appreciate it, because you can kind of see how, you know, where the right-of-way is, where the bike trail's going to go, how it's going to affect the existing property owners. I mean, there's only a couple, but
Yeah.
it would help me kind of clarify that.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mitzi?
Thank you. Yeah, it strikes me that we're trying to accomplish kind of multiple things, and maybe none of them optimally. I'm fairly familiar with the area. I have an association with the Girl Scouts, and so regularly come through here. To, you know, occurs to me that the main traffic calming device we have here is this jog that goes from McRae and then up the jog to get to the northern part, which is not going to be treated in this phase. So I'm kind of curious as to maybe a little history as to how did we get here? That we kind of have this alternative route to Wisconsin that goes through with the jog, and it's kind of a shortcut that people use to get from Northern Lights to Spenard Road.
Good question. How we ended up with the right-of-way the way it is,
Yeah, well, how come neither of these dead end at Fish Creek? I'm just kind of curious how we ended up with this, and is part of the problem we're trying to fix is the reality that this has become something of a shortcut.
Yeah, and yeah, to give a little bit of background, these two roadways used to be local roads, designated local roads, but they were recently revised to collectors, probably for that reason that, you know, a lot of neighborhood traffic ends up flowing through here, and then you get people kind of going north-south through here as well. But honestly, I don't know how, you know, why the original, I guess, right-of-way wasn't developed more in a north-south pattern. We do have an alternative for Turnagain Street to actually accommodate that and straighten it out, but it goes through people's homes again, so it's not really ideal. It's interesting that you mentioned it's kind of a traffic calming feature, because that's what a lot of the residents, I think of it as, is it does deter people because it's somewhat of an annoyance because you have to hit a couple stop signs as opposed to just traveling right through. Yeah, I don't know if I can provide too much more background information on that.
That's okay. I think it kind of goes back to my original comment that I feel like with a limited amount of money available, we're trying to solve an awful lot of issues, which kind of leads me to believe is really what is the highest priority of the issues. I mean, I've seen the flooding.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a major problem.
Yeah, that is a major problem, and it's a major time and, energy for the maintenance department having to go out there, and then it, of course, disrupts the neighborhood because they have to route around this, closed roadway, and it happens at least a couple times every summer, if not more. Just depends on, when those big events happen. So drainage, in my mind, is probably the biggest thing behind the PED facilities, or maybe in line with the PED facilities on Turnagain Boulevard that we're trying to fix.
Yeah, and I can agree with Mr. Spring's viewpoint, too, that this is a much more pleasant neighborhood bikeway, pedestrian way experience than Wisconsin. I mean, it just is. It's shady, it's nice. But just kind of curious how we got there. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Mitzi. I had a couple questions, and then we'll see if we can get a motion, but on Turnagain Street. So clearly your community meetings and discussions with the municipality have involved conversations about Turnagain Street. Is that right? And
Absolutely.
And you just haven't been able to come up with a solution? Is that why you're bifurcating the design study report now?
We've got the 5 different alternatives that we presented in there, but the alternatives that actually provide the collector roadway are such a significant cost because of the property impacts and the full acquisition that the municipality didn't feel that we could go forward with any of those sort of preferred alternatives for the north. So instead of just kind of shutting down the whole project because, north it's not quite clear as to what we're doing, we decided just to proceed with just the south portion now.
I get that. I think what I want to say, and it's a comment as much for staff as it is for you. I mean, we're in the process of going through a land use plan map adoption where we're looking at parts of West Anchorage and Spenard specifically as potentially being able to support redevelopment. And while conceptually that's true, a lot of this part of town consists of 30 feet and 40 feet of right-of-way. So, even when you don't have a collector, when you have local roads, they're often 30 feet. They're not what you want to pick the road model out of the DCM and say, here it is. And so I'm actually most interested in Turnagain Street because I think it represents the questions that we're going to have to answer if we really want to be serious about redevelopment. And, to me, having a sidewalk on one side of the street is better than having no sidewalk at all. Having compromises in our design is better than having the situation that exists now. And I just think we as a community have to start having this because we're not going to have the roads that we want to have unless we come up with a boatload of money and are okay with taking a bunch of people's property. And I suspect neither of those two things are going to be true. And so we need to start really getting serious about alternative road cross-sections that, while it might not meet all of our desires, whether it's from a traffic engineer, from a roadway engineer, or to a resident or citizen that just wants a sidewalk and a pathway. So I appreciate that you've at least laid out in some graphics, hey, this is a problem. But I don't want to kick this can too far down the road because we got to come up with something that works in a different situation and start moving forward rather than what I've seen a lot of times is the city just not declaring something a collector even though it totally functions as that because they don't know how to make it a collector. So they just ignore it.
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't ignore the problem. So anyway, I just wanted to say that and appreciate you laying that out and hopefully we can move this process along to come up with a street that goes all the way through to Northern Lights at some point. Any other comments? And go ahead, Greg, and then maybe I'll ask for a motion after you.
Yeah, it's a collector road, but it's a fair statement to say that, you know, I've traveled this road back in the early 60s, and you didn't travel from north to south, going from Northern Lights area down to Spenard Road. It was a collector road you chose, and you went one way or the other. The neighborhoods would gather into this road to go up to Aurora Village to go shopping at the cars back in the late 60s. And so, you know, when bicycle paths were being developed, they didn't always fit along the road. You put them along the creek, so you put them along, in other cities, you put them along waterways or around the railroad up from it. So if we even look at, I think, 34th and 35th, this road doesn't go all the way through. It has that drastic jog, which I'm surprised we haven't spoken about, but you did earlier. I mean, you're not going to punch it through. You're going to have to buy 2 or 3 properties if that were to happen, and that's not on the table. And so from riding bicycles back in the 70s, you didn't ride your bicycle down McRae like Mr. Spinelli said. It goes down at a hill and into a ditch. This is an area you stayed away from in the wintertime because so many accidents happened at that bottom of that hill because the snow piled up so high. You can't see around it. You can't get around it. And beware, I mean, I had an employee get in an accident at that corner. And it was her fault because she didn't get out of the car, go around and look at the 10-foot berm of snow and look around to make sure it was clear. So it was kind of one of these edging areas. So I think you've got a plan that drives to improve what you have without acquiring the additional properties. As far as getting into the park, which I agree with Mr. Robinson, you know, having a pathway in, what I would like to have seen, and I know this isn't up your area, but down the road, is bicycle paths don't have to follow roads. And I don't think our intent here, though, is for the bicyclist to travel from north to south, south to north. There's other alternative, better routes for that. And that's not how this route is being used now, unless you live halfway through and you're trying to go up to Northern Lights or halfway down and trying to get out to Spenard Road. But this isn't the way you're going to travel otherwise. As far as how this property was developed, it was homesteaded. It was cherry-picked. It was moved. The creek had flowed and overflowed in different directions back then. So the flooding has been happening longer than any of us have been around here. So you've got a plan that you're stuck with the locale here and the geographic. And with that, you've done a good job from that. But we've got also businesses that have encroached out into the right-of-way. I don't know that that's been properly addressed. And you know, whether or not that right-of-way area, because quite frankly, you got snow removal problems that happen there. They push their snow out into the road. The city pushes their snow out into their parking lot, and it goes back and forth. And so you talk about a walkway. There is no walkway in the wintertime. You take your life in your own hands, and you don't go. Not in the Spenard area on that piece. You know, I'm not trying to pontificate here a little bit, but you've done a good job with the plan, with the locale you have. There is no great decision. There's just the adequate decision to make this thing better than what it is. So for that, I applaud, and to see this move forward. It's not ideal. It's not how one would do this and plan this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. This is a little bit better than a Band-Aid.
Yeah, I was also on the design team for the 35th and McRae Road, and it had a lot of the same challenges just with this area. As the planning wasn't all quite there when they were laying it out, and so you do the best you can. And I know for that particular project, we were able to add 1 PED facility. We wanted to add 2, but we had some resistance that ended up with just 1, but the community loves it, and you go out there and there's people utilizing those facilities, and I mean, it does make a big difference.
But I would stress again, the right-of-way is an issue both on the northern side with apartment buildings. I've seen the snow graders go through that area, and they have to divert around because the back end of cars are stuck out there because they haven't pulled all the way in. They are out in the right-of-way, in some cases into the roadway in the wintertime. on the north side at apartments.
Yeah.
They move down into the businesses, they're using this for loading and unloading and storage and so forth of their vehicles and so forth too. So the right-of-way has to get addressed. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Any final thoughts, Justin?
Nope, thank you for your time.
We appreciate yours and appreciate the report. I'm looking for a motion at this point. Mr. Sporhays, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I make a motion to approve this case number 2016-0042 for the draft design study report. If I to be approved to 65% design engineering, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. With the department recommendations on page 5, I also echo the comments made by Commissioner Strike. I think that this is a good job for what they've been kind of left with, but I'd like to add a recommendation to provide further detail on the southern end of the Turnagain Boulevard in regards to the right-of-way and the bike path and how that will affect the existing businesses that have encroached into that right-of-way. And other than that, that's about it.
So let me ask, Mr. Sporhays, your motion is to approve with all 4 recommendations. Is that true?
That's correct.
With a 5th that there be further detail on right-of-way and bike path. And again, as they move forward into a 65% design, it'll get pretty detailed.
That's what I figured.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Ms. Barker. Anybody else wishing to speak to the motion? And I'm not sure that, okay. Where does this start? John, you were in there. Mitzi, you were in there. Is that new? John, you're not in there? Mitzi, you're not? Danielle, go ahead.
I'm not sure if the better way to do this is for me to move to amend the motion,
That's what your option would be at this point.
or just kind of speak to why I would vote no.
Well, let me just give you this. It really does us no good to vote down a design study report because it moves on anyway.
Would to then do it. Okay, so I guess I will move to amend the motion. I have 5 ways in which I would move to amend it. The first.
You want to do them all 5, or you want to do one at a time?
I'll do them one at a time just to make sure. So
Go
the first one is to remove item number 2.
Okay, can I get a second? Seconded by Mr. Spring. Go ahead, speak to it.
And the reason for the removing item number 2 is I think it essentially, the way that it's worded, it would take away the option of having a continuous bike path along the east side of the road. And I don't think we should eliminate that option, especially since we are at that 65% level. So I would not like to see that removed since pedestrian access is very important here.
So your motion is to remove condition number 2, but I would just say that probably the most important part of that motion is to ensure that there's a continuous bikeway,
that will be an illegal
on-grade bikeway, so that there's another way to do that, right? That's really what we're expressing. Okay? That's seconded. You stand by that second, Mr. Spring? Any additional discussion? Please vote on that amendment to the motion. Actually, we can't do this yet, yeah? It's not working. I don't have a vote yet. Maybe we get there. So I'm not getting an option, but I vote yay. Okay, that motion is approved. So as amended, the removal of number 2. Back to you, Ms. Bailey.
And then another amendment would be to add a new item, which I guess this would make it item 5, would be where possible maintain marked bicycle lanes on both the east and the west side of Turnagain Boulevard. And again, this goes back to what I was saying last time. I think it's very important to have those shoulder lanes where possible. I'm not saying that they have to be there. I'm just saying it should be something that should be strongly considered as they move forward, that pedestrian access is very important.
But again, this is the marked
Yes,
on-street bike lanes that you're talking about.
correct.
Okay, if that's the intent, you believe this should be marked. Is that your second, John, or is that from before?
No, I second.
That's the second. That's that motion to amend made by Ms. Bailey, seconded by Mr. Spring. Mr. Strike, you're in the queue.
Yes, a question on that. If I heard correctly, there's not enough room on the roadway?
That was in reference to a pedestrian access. If you turn to page where they show the alternatives and their report, it's on page 44. They always have a 3.5-foot shoulder going both on the east side of the road and the west side of the road continuously on both sides.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry. I think I may not support this one for two reasons. First, the 3.5-foot shoulder really isn't adequate doesn't meet the requirements for an actual bike lane. Bike lane needs to be 5 foot, so this would not meet the design criteria for a bike lane. So instead of that, what I was, I think, suggesting earlier was that you put a share the road sign up so that you know it's, you expect bicyclists along there. They can utilize this 3.5-foot section, not as a official bike lane, but they can use it as a bike routes, and probably very safely also because of the low traffic volumes and et cetera. So I won't.
I would also support that as a friendly amendment as a shared road.
So, and just to clarify, it sounds like, and maybe Justin, you can nod. If it's not 5 feet, it's unlikely that it would actually get striped. Is that true? Correct. So, okay. So I have a restated motion to include share the road signs on both sides of the street. Is that your motion now, Ms. Bailey?
That is correct.
And seconded by Mr. Spring. Is there any objection to this motion? Hearing none, that motion is approved. Okay, so we're back to the main motion with 2 amendments. Ms. Bailey, you said you had another couple.
Yes, and this one will get to, I believe, the issue that Mr. Strike had in thinking that it wasn't where the pedestrian sidewalk on the east side of the road peters out. So my amendment would be that where possible, attempt and prioritize a continuous pedestrian pathway along the east side of Turnagain Boulevard. And my reasoning behind that is that the east side of this area is where the park is located, and so then it would eliminate the need to have pedestrians cross over right in front of the park, and there would just be a continuous access along there. And again, it's where possible. If they're not able to shift the road, it's not possible, but I think they should attempt to prioritize a continuous pedestrian pathway along the side of the road.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. That's, I think, seconded by Mr. Spring. Yes, it's seconded. Any additional comments? Seeing none, please vote on that amendment. I am a yes. So that amendment passes 6-2. Ms. Bailey.
And then for the last amendment, incorporate traffic calming into the design, including road shifting, bump out corners, and coordinate with the Fish Creek rehabilitation to connect bike lanes where possible.
So did you get that, or you want to restate it? Let's try one more time.
Incorporate traffic calming into the design, including road shifting and bump out corners.
Hold on. Including. No, I sometimes worry about these pop out corners because they get in the way of your bike lane. So.
It's just.
I don't like them.
So I'll just say incorporate traffic calming into the design.
There you go.
And then coordinate with Fish Creek rehabilitation to connect the bike lane into the park and the bike path.
Okay, I'm gonna, you might rely on the tapes for that one unless you want one more time. You good? Okay. Okay, that motion is made by Ms. Bailey. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Spring.
And then my reasoning behind the motion
Go
is,
ahead.
I think they spoke a lot with both the Turnagain Community Council. A lot of their comments were that there is another project going on there, and it was mentioned that they were in the process of talking with the project, and it seems like that was something they were doing, but I just wanted to make it more explicit that they, as moving forward, that would be an easy process for them to do. And they also mentioned that they were going to be incorporating further traffic calming, and I just think that as it gets further in design, we should be aware of that.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Bailey. That motion is made and seconded. Is there additional discussion? I'm going to need you verbally to show me. No additional discussion. Could we have is there any opposition to that motion to amend? Seeing none, that amendment is adopted. Okay, you're back to the main motion as amended. Anyone else wishing to either speak to the main motion or go ahead, Mr. Strike?
Yes. With these 4 additional, I believe there were 4, with the removal of 1 and then the 4 other additional amendments, I would look to the petitioner. Are any of these items of concern?
The 4 new ones?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So plausible, incorporatable, and so forth.
Yeah, the pathway connection all the way up, I think, is just, we're going to do our best we can. We obviously can't fill in the creek. So our goal is the same as the community councils and everybody else, is to get that pathway in. And even though they have to cross once you get up there to 35th and McRae. Okay. But yeah, no, they seem doable, definitely.
And as I look out to the rest of the audience, I don't see any concerns.
Oh no, you're opening a public hearing now, just looking for someone to jump up and down. Be careful when you do that sometimes.
just kind of whistling along.
All right.
Thank you.
You'd know if Kathy had something. I didn't
have my glasses on.
Any additional comments, Ms. Bailey?
I just want to say that I think that it's really good that this is being done. This has been an issue in the neighborhood for a long time. I like the fact that you are taking a stepped approach to this. I think it makes sense to deal with the south part now just because you have the right of way. I think that was very smart to not let something that's going to be a little difficult hold up the rest of the project for something that needs to be done. I also think you did a really good job of looking into different alternatives, and I think at the end it's going to be a much better situation than it is right now, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. And Mr. Spring.
Yeah, just like add a few other comments in support of the motion. I think the speed calming is going to be an important part of this project. It looks like from the data that they collected that there's quite high speeds along this road. It's significant. I think it was 36 miles an hour, 85th percentile, which is pretty high for a neighborhood collector like this, and something needs to be done for sure. Also, I really appreciate the multimodal treatment on this facility. Looking at the traffic analysis that was done by Kittleson Associates, they basically rated it as A for multimodal use, given the design that you've come up with. So, big improvement in that aspect of the roadway.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Anyone else with any comments? Seeing none, is there any opposition to the main motion as amended? Hearing none, the design study report is approved. Thank you for your time here tonight. I believe that's it. Is that right? Mr. Walker's not here, but if someone would do him the honor. Thank you, Mr. Kange. Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, you don't need any findings for this, do you?
Well, we had them as we went.
Beautiful.
Yep. Have a good rest of the month. See you in June.